It begins with a ledger, bound in cracked leather, dated 1859. Its pages are filled with names, but beside each, a symbol, a crude drawing of an eye, sometimes crossed out, sometimes marked with a small X. There are no medical diagnoses, no payments recorded, only a growing list of patients and a silent implication that something was taken. At the edge of the ledger's last page, scrawled in a faded script, is a chilling note. Left one screaming, right eye intact. Who wrote it? That name, Dr. Heinrich Voss, appears once in the corner of a folded medical license recovered from a bricked wall in northern Prussia, near the ruins of a long-abandoned sanatorium. And yet, there are no patient complaints in public records, no court filings, no formal accusations, only a pattern of disappearances, sudden burials, conflicting death dates, and a community that, over time, stopped asking questions. What makes this story worth telling now is not just its horror, but its persistence. Over 160 years later, the case of Dr. Voss still surfaces, in fragments, in whispered stories passed down in German medical schools, in anonymous letters sent to archivists, and in one particularly unusual discovery, a preserved human eyeball, found sealed inside an 1860s apothecary jar, labeled simply Subject 9. No proof, but no closure either. This is not a story of blood and spectacle. It is a story of absence, of things taken and never returned. A story where the facts we do have may point to something far darker than fiction could imagine. Because if even part of this story is true, if even one of those names in the ledger belonged to a living, breathing person, then the silence around Dr. Voss is not an oversight. It is a cover. Before we begin unraveling what little remains, let me ask you this. What city are you listening from? Drop it in the comments. It helps us understand where these stories resonate, and why some echoes refuse to fade. And if you're drawn to mysteries buried in time, subscribe. We tell stories most leave untouched. The year was 1859. The place, the rural township of Kaltenbroich, then a modest settlement tucked into the mist-laden forests near the Prussian-Bohemian border. Officially listed as a medical frontier station, it served scattered logging communities, miners from the Silesian Ridge, and convicts from nearby labor camps. Into this remote outpost came Dr. Heinrich Voss, age 42, holding a valid medical license issued from the University of Königsberg in 1847. The transfer order was found in the Saxon State Archives, sealed and water-stained, bearing the insignia of the Royal Sanitation Bureau. Dr. Heinrich Voss, surgeon of the eye and nerve, hereby stationed to Kaltenbroich Sanatorium, effective January 14, 1859. But the sanatorium to which he was assigned appears to have already been closed. A document from 1857, just 2 years prior, records its temporary decommissioning due to frost damage and patient transference. No subsequent reopening order could be located. And yet, Voss moved in, set up practice, took patients. The town's remaining postmaster, a Mr. Eduard Rehmer, makes mention of Voss in his logbook. January 30th delivered 4 parcels to sanatorium residents, addressed to Dr. H. Voss. 2 marked surgical. 1 contained lenses. Last smelled strongly of ether. That entry is followed by a series of abrupt notations. February 3rd. Sent child to fetch message from doctor. Returned pale, crying. Refused to explain February 7th. No reply to telegram regarding patient transfer. February 11th. Heard unverified report of screaming at second hour past midnight. None of these were followed up in the postmaster's own hand, but someone, later, had underlined those 3 entries, lightly, in pencil. The first impossibility appears on March 19th, 1859. That was the date of Marta Elsner's death certificate, age 19. Cause listed, trauma-induced neural rupture. The certificate was signed by Voss himself. However, a letter discovered in the possession of Magdalena Fuchs, a family servant who later emigrated to Belgium, contradicts this. Dated March 21st, it reads, "Miss Marta still breathes but speaks not. He tells us it is shock, but her eyes, oh God, she looks at nothing." Which is not possible. The certificate says she died on the 19th. The letter claims she was alive on the 21st. The times don't align, and neither do the burial records, which list her interment on March 28th, a full 9 days after the stated date of death, in a grave marked unblessed. A grave that, when exhumed during an unauthorized dig in 1933, was found empty. Only fragments of lace and the inner lining of a coffin remained. There's more. An inventory dated May 1859, recovered from the cellar ledgers of the Heiligenberg supply house, lists the following order: 20 glass vials, 6 ounces, 3 surgical scalpels, curved, 1 handheld clamp, ocular, preserving fluid, non-standard mixture. All addressed to the sanatorium, all signed for by Dr. Voss. And in a final oddity, a traveller's journal kept by Reverend Karl Steinbach, who passed through Kaltenbroich in June, records a cryptic entry. Called on the house of healing, windows dark, knocked, heard footsteps. No one answered, but from within the sound of weeping, and a strange song hummed, as if by a child. A qualified physician, no recorded complaint, no newspaper coverage, and yet a closed facility, reopened unofficially. A death dated before a letter claims life, a grave without a body, each detail small on its own. Together, they sketch the beginning of something unnatural, not violent, not visible, but systemic, intentional, and protected. In any historical inquiry, there comes a moment when rumor must meet record. For the case of Dr. Heinrich Voss, that moment begins with 2 quietly filed but revealing documents, now held in separate archives. Neither was connected to the other until recently. The first is a quarterly report submitted by Inspector Albrecht Heimann of the Prussian Department of Medical Oversight, dated September 17, 1859. It was never intended for publication, and for decades remained sealed in the basement of the Staatsarchiv in Dresden. Among a routine stack of evaluations, one short paragraph stands out. Station Kaltenbroich. Sanitary conditions sufficient, though facility lacks formal licensure. One practicing surgeon, Voss H., observed treating patients, refused external audit, citing sovereign medical jurisdiction. Reported 1 death, though burial documentation incomplete. Recommending follow-up with provincial legal office. No action authorized at present. This notation is the only surviving government document acknowledging Voss's active presence in Kaltenbroich. It confirms his authority, his defiance, and the fact that even Prussian medical regulators deferred rather than confront him. There's no record of any follow-up. The second source is more obscure, but more revealing. In 1881, over 2 decades after Voss's alleged tenure, a case abstract appears in the legal digest Berichte über abnorme Heilpraktiken, or Reports on Abnormal Healing Practices. It summarizes a court hearing. Case number 1174/KR/1881, convened in Leipzig concerning a dispute over malpractice allegations at a rural medical station. The case was dismissed, but buried within the legal argument is a curious point of reference. Counsel for the defense cited precedent from an earlier station closure, wherein the physician, V. Kaltenbroich, had been allowed to continue limited private practice despite formal decertification of the medical site. Court noted that although complaints had been received posthumously, no legal action had been pursued at the time. This notation, brief as it is, provides something chilling. A judicial recognition, however indirect, that complaints existed about Dr. Voss, that his practice had persisted outside formal channels, and that whatever those complaints entailed, they were ignored or forgotten long enough for them to become legally inert, posthumous, unpursued, closed. Further validation emerges in the April 1862 edition of Der Allgemeine Chirurg, a Berlin-based medical journal. In a column titled Peripheral Developments, an unnamed reviewer critiques the eccentric and undocumented practices of certain borderland surgeons. One line is particularly stark. In Kaltenbroich, it is alleged, a solitary practitioner removed ocular organs for unspecified study without recording anesthesia or post-operative care. The records, if any exist, have not surfaced. Nor have the patients. This is 3 years after Voss's supposed departure. But the whisper persists. When we examine these layers, a regulator noting irregularities, a legal digest citing uninvestigated allegations, a medical journal implying organ removal without consent. They form the first rung of an authority stack. Not enough for indictment, but more than coincidence. Each source comes from a different sphere: government, law, medicine. None are conclusive on their own, but each quietly affirms the same shadow, that something happened in Kaltenbroich and that someone worked to keep it buried. In 1871, Germany unified. Kaltenbroich became a neglected node on a growing railway map. The sanatorium vanished from records, but its legacy had already begun its second life, in footnotes, courtrooms, and the margins of forgotten ledgers. In stories such as this, where the line between legend and truth erodes with each retelling, it is not the voices that remain, but the objects. 3 artifacts survive, each found separately, each linked by provenance or implication to the house on the hill where Dr. Heinrich Voss once worked in silence. Recovered in 1974 by a team of architecture students surveying abandoned sites in Saxony, the first item is a fragment of a patient ledger, bound in goatskin, brittle with age, and water-damaged beyond full legibility. Held today in the Königsfeld Historical Collections, its cover bears no name, but inside, among faded entries, a handful of lines remain readable. Number 18, J. Queller. Involuntary motion ceased second day. RI unresponsive. Marked discoloration number 19, E. Franz. Refused ether. Procedure incomplete. Screamed until blood rose in left canal number 20 name illegible final. Distilled. Intact optic. What makes the fragment significant is not only its handwriting, matched to Voss's license, but the presence of repeated marginalia. A single symbol. An eye. Sketched simply, but in some cases, the pupil is missing. Scholars disagree on interpretation, but most chilling is the annotation in different ink beside entry 20. Sealed. Must remain cold. Dated October 6, 1859, a letter addressed to the Berlin office of anatomical supply was never sent. It was found beneath floorboards during the demolition of the Kaltenbroich postal house in 1928. Written in elegant script on embossed paper, it reads, "To the Anatomische Abteilung, I hereby request the delivery of preservation compound V3 or alternative equivalent in 6 flasks. My studies require optical integrity under extended storage. Kindly waive signature upon delivery. Facility access is variable. H. Voss, M.D." The letter bears a watermark linked to St. Gisella's Surgical Academy, a known supplier of laboratory materials. There is no record of the order being fulfilled, but the specific mention of optical integrity suggests a study far beyond routine treatment, perhaps even collection. It surfaced in 1998, discovered among unsorted donations at the Wittenberg Medical Curiosities Archive. It had no tag, no file, no listed donor. The contents, however, were unmistakable. A glass apothecary jar, sealed with wax. Inside, a cloudy preservative solution, and floating within, an intact human eyeball. Labeled in faded ink, Subject 9, R dilated. L rupture. There was no tissue sample to extract viable DNA, no identifying records. But the handwriting on the label, compared by archivists to Voss's known signature, showed an 83% match in stroke pattern. Even more unsettling was the jar's alignment with the ledger fragment, entry number. 9 was never found. The numbering resumes at 10, mid-page. Each of these items could be coincidence. Each could be forgery or misattribution. But their physicality, the curling edge of a ledger, the wax seal on a letter never posted, the cool distortion of glass around a single human eye, anchors the myth in reality. They are not proof, but they are presence. In assembling them, a pattern begins to emerge, not of a madman's violence, but of meticulous purpose. Voss was not improvising. He was building something, or preserving something, or perhaps searching for something. And each artifact left behind feels less like a mistake and more like a trace he allowed to remain. By autumn of 1859, something had shifted in Kaltenbroich. While official documents remained scarce, oral histories passed through surviving families of the region hint at a mounting unease, one that slowly transformed whispers into quiet withdrawals. In October, the church records of St. Matthias Parish, located 3 miles east of the sanatorium site, record a sudden drop in baptisms and funerals conducted in the region. Between 1856 and mid-1859, the church averaged 6 services per month. But from October to December of 1859, there were only 2, both listed as unofficial rites, held in absence of family. The presiding priest, Father Anselm Richter, wrote a letter on November 2nd to the bishopric in Leipzig. The people are afraid, though few will speak it aloud. I have visited 3 homes now where the windows remain shuttered in daylight, and at least one man, Herr Köhler, has taken to carrying a lantern at all hours, even into the fields. There is talk of the dark physician and what he keeps in his cellar. I do not believe all of it, but I believe enough Father Anselm's name does not appear in the church rolls again after January 1860. No resignation letter, no transfer notice, only a note in the margin, in another hand, removed. Voluntary departure. But no one recorded where he went. The community's silence fractured in late November when a young woman named Agathe Schreiber, 23, attempted to leave Kaltenbroich by rail. She had been working as a caretaker in the sanatorium kitchen, one of the few locals still willing to enter the grounds. According to railway station records from Waldhof Depot, she arrived at 6:11 p.m., visibly shaken, carrying no luggage. The station master, Heinrich Voss, later gave a sworn statement in 1873 during a separate investigation unrelated to Voss. She kept looking over her shoulder, asked if the train would pass any station with doctors. I told her not until Leipzig. She looked ill, said, "They lie still, but they aren't quiet." When I asked who she meant, she just whispered, "The ones without eyes." She never boarded, and she was never seen again. No missing person report, no family inquiry. Only the station record and Bredow's statement survive. It was around this same time that a false lead gained traction, a theory that, for a time, diverted suspicion away from Voss. A group of young boys gathering firewood in the Waldstein Grove reported finding a burlap sack nailed to a tree. Inside were bones, small, white, fragile. They believed them to be human. A traveling hunter, Niklas Rau, retrieved the sack and brought it to the Kaltenbroich guard post, then manned by Sergeant Wilhelm Meissner. His report, dated December 3, 1859, concludes, the remains are avian in nature, most likely owl or pheasant. The cloth sack bears no marking. Evidence of ritual activity or folklore games cannot be excluded. No further action warranted. The incident fed local superstition, fueling theories of a forest cult or pre-Christian ritual site near the hill. For months, townspeople focused on the woods, avoiding the sanatorium entirely. But the sack and its contents were never preserved. No photographs, no laboratory testing, just a single line in a rural guard log, and a town willing to believe in anything but the truth on their doorstep. Looking back, this was the fracture point. The community had stopped questioning. The church had gone silent. Even the rumors had changed direction. Voss remained undisturbed. And whatever was happening behind those stone walls, whether it was experiment, obsession, or something worse, was no longer being watched. False leads have a way of embedding themselves, especially when they offer relief. In Kaltenbroich, the story of forest rituals and animal bones had provided just enough misdirection to lull the town back into a strained stillness. But pressure was building elsewhere. On January 22, 1860, an anonymous letter arrived at the Royal Medical Office in Berlin, postmarked from Wittenberg, a town 200 kilometers away. Written in tight, deliberate script, it carried no signature, only the phrase, "I served. I saw. I left inside," a single paragraph. The doctor at Kaltenbroich is not a surgeon. He is a collector. He does not seek to heal, only to remove. I packed gauze around sockets he said were no longer viable. They were viable. If the town cannot speak, perhaps the capital can. This letter remained archived, untouched for decades, until rediscovered in 1992 by historian Marta Klein, who cross-referenced its phrasing with a requisition letter found under the floorboards of the postal house. The handwriting did not match, but the language did. Viable, preservation, socket. Klein noted in her report, whoever wrote this letter had either served under Voss or studied his methodology directly. The clinical detachment is consistent with late 1850s medical language, and its terminology matches the phrasing found in the sealed requisition draft. Still, in 1860, no formal investigation followed. No inspector arrived, but someone else did. A Jesuit scholar, Brother Theodor Reinhardt, from the Order of St. Ignatius, is recorded as traveling to Kaltenbroich in early February 1860 as part of a broader mission to observe unlicensed medical phenomena. The entry appears in the Clerical Correspondence Registry of Saxony, marked exploratory and signed only on dispatch. What happened next is preserved in fragments, none official, but all consistent. A journal, attributed to Brother Reinhardt and authenticated by ink and paper dating, was found decades later inside a locked drawer at the Abbey of St. Antoninus, 90 kilometers north. Though its entries are sparse and abruptly stop, 3 pages pertain directly to Kaltenbroich. Arrived at dusk. Sanatorium appears intact, though west wing collapsed. Met with the doctor. Calm, cold, articulate. He offered tea. Declined. Said he is on the verge of a discovery in neurological windowing. Showed me specimens, jars, preserved tissue. Several eyes. One blinked, though removed, and the final entry, "There is no God in that place." Reinhardt returned to the abbey the following week, reportedly silent, pale, and ill. He took leave from the order that spring. No other missions were assigned to him after. These 2 corrections, the letter and the visit, mark a turning point. The forest cult theory collapsed under the weight of first-hand testimony. Pressure moved again toward Voss, but quietly. No warrant was issued. No public inquiry opened. Only private correspondence, notes in margins, letters with no return addresses, journal entries locked in drawers. The pressure mounted not from institutions, but from individuals, and one by one, those individuals either disappeared, withdrew, or stopped writing altogether. Even those who sought to act could only record, not intervene. It raises a question that lingers beneath this entire investigation. Was Dr. Heinrich Voss protected, or was everyone simply too late? Because what occurred at Kaltenbroich did not escalate. It accumulated layer upon layer of silence, sealed in glass and folded paper, until even those who noticed had no one left to tell. The further one digs into the shadow of Dr. Heinrich Voss, the more it becomes clear. This was not improvisation, not impulse. It was a method, and a chillingly consistent one. The second wave of artifacts, unearthed over the course of several decades, suggests an evolving system, a deliberate pattern. What follows are 3 more objects, each found under unrelated circumstances, yet each tethered by time, inscription or content to Kaltenbroich and to Voss. Discovered in 1966, inside a trunk purchased at a rural estate auction in Rochlitz, the chart was tucked among irrelevant household documents. Folded tightly, yellowed and written in Latin and High German, it was marked as an ocular neurology overlay. But at its bottom corner, faintly etched in pencil, was a note in cursive script. Only the lucid remain still. The chart maps nerve clusters connecting the visual cortex to the frontal lobe, but includes non-standard annotations, specifically window pulse 11 to 13 seconds. Resistance gap, right eye, measurable in moments of disbelief. Preservation ideal, within 60 minutes of last verbal coherence. What's notable is the timing. The overlay reference concepts of cognitive delay that wouldn't be formally described until the early 20th century. Yet here, in 1859, they appear in embryonic form. The writing style matches samples from Voss's requisition draft and personal log. In 1984, during restoration efforts at the Thuringian State Library, a partially burned book spine was identified among fire-damaged storage boxes. When opened, the book contained 13 numbered names, each followed by notations. Subject 4, non-compliant, left only. Subject 6, full clarity, 9:37 post-anesthetic. Subject 9, no reaction, sealed. Subject 10, blank gaze, but lucid response to tone. Each entry was marked with a timestamp, never a date. Times ranged from 8:47 p.m. to 3:03 a.m., suggesting the work occurred at night, possibly when other residents were asleep or sedated. At the very end of the page, a brief line, begin again with 14. No more entries follow. Of the few words that remain legible, the most disturbing is a single column header, interval of sightlessness. This phrase appears nowhere else in 19th century medical literature. No journal, no doctoral thesis, no surgical index. Its meaning remains unclear. In 2009, a renovation crew working on what was once the Kaltenbroich postal house, converted in the 1980s into a private residence, discovered a wooden panel behind a fireplace. The back side of the panel had been painted over in dark resin, but ultraviolet examination revealed an image underneath. A grid of eyes, 5 by 5, meticulously painted in oil. Each eye was slightly different in color, size, and shape. Each gaze faced a different direction, and beneath them, a single line in Latin, Noli aspicere, ne redent, do not look, lest they return. There was no signature, but the pigment used matched samples from mid-19th century anatomical illustrators working in Berlin. Experts remain divided. Some claim the panel is symbolic, perhaps a caution against medical transgression. Others suspect it was a visual record of something Voss couldn't preserve in specimen jars. These artifacts, collectively, are more than curiosities. They interlock. The surgical chart describes the brain's window of visual silence. The ledger tracks patients by their reactions to that window. The panel depicts the end result, not loss of life, but loss of perception. There is a precision to it, a system of observation, response, removal, all within measured intervals, and throughout one element recurs again and again. The eye, but not as a symbol, as a threshold, as if Voss believed that within the eye, and only in its final moments, lay a kind of passage, or proof. He wasn't documenting illness. He was recording transitions, not death, but something just before it, and perhaps something just beyond it. By the spring of 1860, the silence around Kaltenbroich had become too precise to be natural. The sanatorium still stood, its shutters closed, its doors locked from within. The structure itself had begun to rot, yet smoke continued to rise from the eastern chimney at irregular hours. Supply runners reported no visual contact with Voss for weeks, though parcels left at the gate would vanish by morning, and yet no investigation arrived. The bureaucratic channels, so carefully constructed for oversight, had folded inward. Letters were misplaced, inquiries dismissed, jurisdiction blurred. Until finally, the pressure shifted from state to individual conscience. On May 12, 1860, Albrecht Heimann, the same regional inspector who had previously filed the soft warning about Voss, returned to Kaltenbroich without authorization. We know this not from state archives, but from his personal notebook, recovered in 1911 by his grandson and later donated to the Munich Bureau of Medical History. The entry from that day reads, "Arrived 9:43 a.m. The grounds are silent, trees overgrown, knocked 3 times, no answer. Forced door with crowbar from cart. Interior stinks of tincture, mold, and meat. No sign of life, yet candles burned low. Ledger open to entry 21, no ink smear, no dust. Basement sealed with rusted chain. Will return with torch and pry." There are no entries after that, not in the notebook, not in any record. Heimann never returned to his post. According to the 1861 regional staffing roster, his position was marked vacant, cause unspecified. In 1994, a team of conservationists working on the grounds, now overgrown and cordoned off due to sinkholes, discovered a length of rusted iron chain beneath collapsed flooring in the western wing. It matched the description from Heimann's notes. Still locked, still coiled, but fused into the earth. Nearby, a wax-sealed medical bottle had survived. Inside, preserved in degraded solution, was a folded note. No name, no date. The ink had bled, but one phrase could still be made out under spectral imaging. He opened what should not be opened. Eyes do not close all at once. The chain and bottle are now kept at the Bundesmuseum für medizinische Ethik under restricted handling. It wasn't just officials who turned away. Even local historians, generations later, would decline to publish anything too conclusive. In a 1977 letter, Professor Klaus Udermann of the Leipzig Institute for Medical History wrote, "The Voss material is compelling, but attracts the wrong kind of attention. I've seen petitions to exhume soil around the sanatorium. I've seen letters marked with the eye symbol, nailed to my office door. Some stories belong only in archive basements. Let them rot where they were born." This chilling deferral, refusal not due to disbelief, but fear of consequence, became the dominant stance among scholars who encountered the pattern. The further one investigated, the more resistance appeared, not through institutional denial, but from a growing belief that perhaps the truth was not safe to uncover. By this point, the idea of Voss as a rogue doctor had evolved into something else. The ledger, the notes, the jars, the symbols, the disappearances, they no longer read as the byproducts of madness, but of calculated pursuit, a search for something he believed was measurable, extractable, repeatable, And in that pursuit, he required one thing above all: eyes. Alive, awake, seconds from death. What he was trying to witness or preserve, we may never fully understand, but the pattern is clear. Observation, timing, removal, recording. Silence. He sought not the soul, not the cure, but the interval, the unmeasurable space between perception and absence, and he pursued it alone. The story of Heinrich Voss does not end in whispers. It ends in confrontation, though one that never reached a courtroom or newspaper headline. For in the summer of 1860, pressure finally broke through the silence. Among the few surviving state records is a dispatch order from the Leipzig Provincial Legal Office, dated July 14, 1860. It assigned court clerk Friedrich Danner to Kaltenbroich, tasked with reviewing discrepancies in medical licensing, supply requisitions, and burial records. Danner was not a magistrate, nor an inspector. He was a bureaucrat, chosen precisely because his presence would draw little attention. Yet his personal diary, preserved by his family and later published in fragments in 1938, offers the most vivid description we possess of what transpired that month. Arrived at the station near midnight. No one to receive me. Walked 2 kilometers uphill through heavy mist. The sanatorium loomed as a carcass, roof sagging, walls black with damp. Yet within, a faint lamplight glowed. I knocked. After long pause, a voice answered. Low, deliberate. He opened the door. Tall, gaunt, dressed in black coat stained with something oily. Introduced himself simply, Dr. Voss. Danner describes being led inside, offered a chair at a heavy oak table, and shown a collection of sealed glass jars, arranged in rows upon the shelves. Each jar contained fluid. Each jar contained an eye. Some bore tags with names, others only numbers. He spoke of thresholds, of sight that outlives perception. He said he had captured the very moment where the mind ceases to believe what the eye still insists upon. I asked about the patients. He smiled. Said they had gone home. Said the eyes remained to remind him of their courage. Danner wrote that he left the house shaken, carrying with him a folded sheet of notes Voss had pressed into his hand. At the top of the page, interval of sightlessness, confirmed. Danner never filed his full report. Instead, on July 19th, he submitted a single-page memorandum to Leipzig. The sanatorium is no longer functional. The physician's practice is unsustainable. Recommend closure of records and termination of oversight. No further visits required. Within weeks, Kaltenbroich was officially delisted as a medical station. By August 1860, the sanatorium had been abandoned. Supplies ceased, post ceased, even railway shipments ceased. Dr. Heinrich Voss vanished from all formal record. No obituary, no grave, no forwarding address, only silence. In 1874, a mason working to dismantle the eastern wing discovered a bricked cavity behind a wall. Inside were 13 glass jars, cloudy but intact. Each contained ocular specimens, some shriveled, others preserved with surprising clarity. The mason's account, later retold in a regional almanac, records. 1 jar burst when touched. The eye within floated to the surface, staring upward. I dropped it. It rolled toward the door as though it still sought to see. Most of the jars disappeared into private hands. 2 are rumored to survive in hidden collections. 1 surfaced in Wittenberg, already catalogued as Subject 9. This was the reckoning, not of justice, but of withdrawal. Institutions had looked briefly and then chosen to turn away. Voss was never tried, never punished, never absolved. His legacy was left to rot in sealed rooms and quiet rumors, and with time, the ground itself swallowed the sanatorium. But the artifacts remain, and in them, the echo of a pursuit that was not meant to be known. The disappearance of Heinrich Voss in the summer of 1860 left behind a vacuum, not only of leadership in Kaltenbroich, but of responsibility. Institutions did not announce his absence. They folded it quietly into paperwork, sealing away any inquiry that might have drawn the public eye. By 1861, official maps of Saxony no longer marked Kaltenbroich as a medical station. Instead, the land was listed as disused agricultural property. No transfer deeds, no sales, just a change of terminology. The following year, the Royal Medical Bureau issued a short directive. Facilities not maintained, practices discontinued, and oversight no longer required for the Kaltenbroich region. All records pertaining to this station to be archived under Class Z, Class Z was a catch-all category, reserved for disputed or incomplete files. In practice, it meant the documents were sealed, boxed, and buried in basements where clerks seldom looked. It was bureaucratic burial, neater than exhumation, safer than trial. What did follow were small reforms, quiet, incremental, and unlinked by name to Voss. In 1863, the University of Königsberg revised its surgical accreditation system, adding a new requirement. Candidates must demonstrate verifiable apprenticeship under no fewer than 2 separate licensed surgeons. In 1865, the Leipzig Provincial Court altered its malpractice statutes, inserting a clause on extra-legal ocular experimentation. The language was vague, but it formalized restrictions against procedures performed without an established curative objective. And by 1870, the Ministry of Health required that all medical requisitions for preservation fluids include signed approval from 2 independent authorities. None of these reforms mention Voss. But the timing is too exact to ignore. The true outcome, however, is measured not in statutes but in absence. Between 1859 and 1860, at least 21 names appear in the surviving fragments of Voss's ledgers. None of those names appear in parish marriage registers, school rolls, or tax records after 1860. In most cases, they vanish completely from civil documentation. No forwarding residence, no burial with rites, nothing. The lives they lived, their homes, their families, their occupations, disappeared with them. All that remains are numbers, notations, and, in some cases, eyes preserved in liquid. By the late 19th century, the Kaltenbroich sanatorium had become a story whispered more than studied. Farmers warned their children not to climb its walls. Travelers avoided the road at dusk. In 1887, a local newspaper, the Sächsische Volksblatt, ran a brief article under the headline, "The Blind House." It referred to the site as a folkloric ruin said to swallow those who entered. No mention of Voss by name. No evidence cited. Just a superstition folded into regional lore. The legend became safer than the truth, and in time, safer was all anyone wanted. So what was the reckoning? There was no trial, no memorial, no official acknowledgement of those who vanished under Voss's care. The only reforms were structural, rules rewritten to prevent another unmonitored physician from pursuing such work. But rules are abstractions. They do not name the missing. They do not restore dignity to those whose final moments may have been recorded as intervals of sightlessness. What remains, then, is the dissonance of erasure. A man removed from maps, a practice erased from records, a silence preserved more carefully than the lives it consumed. And so the outcome of Dr. Heinrich Voss's work was not justice, it was disappearance. And in that disappearance, the shadow of his pursuit lingers still. For every record that survives, there are 3 more that do not, and in the gaps, the story of Heinrich Voss slips further into shadow. We know the names of some patients, we know fragments of their conditions, their supposed outcomes. But what became of them, their bodies, their families, their voices, remains untraceable. In archives from Leipzig to Dresden, files are either sealed under Class Z or missing altogether. More than once, a catalogue entry lists Kaltenbroich records, only to reveal an empty folder when opened. Absence itself has become the evidence. The disappearance of Albrecht Heimann, the regional inspector who vowed to return with a torch and pry, has never been explained. No obituary, no transfer, only his notebook. A single man erased as thoroughly as the patients he documented. His family, when interviewed in 1904, claimed they were told he had been lost in the field. But the field was never named. If Heimann was silenced, who silenced him, and why? In 1933, workers excavating the lower slope of the Kaltenbroich hill uncovered a shallow trench lined with broken coffins. The discovery was noted briefly in the district log. Human remains discovered, partial, degraded. Possible victims of cholera. The log ends there. No forensic study. No relocation to consecrated ground. The trench was recovered and marked as unsuitable for agriculture. Later surveys found nothing, but locals insist bones still surface after heavy rain. Small pale fragments that vanish again by morning. Even the objects themselves resist permanence. The jars recovered in 1874, 13 in number, were dispersed within months. Today, only 2 can be accounted for, one in Wittenberg, another rumored in a private Berlin collection, unverified, the rest sold, broken, lost. One letter from 1921 mentions a jar purchased at a market in Dresden, still sealed with something cloudy inside. It has never resurfaced. The ledger fragments, too, are incomplete. Pages torn, margins blackened by mold. One archivist noted in 1989 that the ink had faded in the shape of eyes, blank spaces where words once were. Whether decay or intention, no one can say. Most chilling of all is the fate of Brother Theodor Reinhardt, the Jesuit scholar who visited Voss and returned with his journal scrawled, "There is no God in that place." His abbey records end in 1861, stating only, "Brother Theodore withdrawn, health unsound." After that, no mention. His journal remained locked for decades. Why? What did he witness in that house? Candles burning, jars on shelves, a doctor speaking of neurological windowing. That left him broken. The order has never commented. These gaps form their own pattern, a sanatorium erased from maps, an inspector erased from duty, a cleric erased from faith, patients erased from record, artifacts erased from circulation. At the center of it all, Voss. But he too disappears. No grave, no obituary, no trail beyond the summer of 1860. Did he flee? Was he silenced? Did he continue his work elsewhere under another name? The archive is mute, and in its muteness, the legend only grows. The unknowns may in fact be the truest part of the story. They force us to ask, what does it mean when silence itself becomes the evidence? And what does it mean that so many chose to leave that silence intact? What remains of Dr. Heinrich Voss is not a body, nor a confession, nor even a grave. What remains are fragments, pages, chains, jars, and silence. The final known reference to Voss appears in a shipping manifest dated March 1861, held in the Hamburg Maritime Registry. Among crates of medical instruments bound for Antwerp is a single line. One container, glassware, sealed, H. Voss. No follow-up record exists. The container is never noted again. Antwerp's docks processed thousands of shipments that year. One more crate could vanish into anonymity with ease. Did Voss attempt to relocate his work abroad? Did his specimens leave with him? The record is thin, but its timing, mere months after Kaltenbroich's closure, is haunting. We cannot prove the patient's fates. We cannot prove whether the jars were all his or whether some were attributed later by opportunistic collectors. We cannot even prove whether Voss truly vanished or whether he simply slipped into another name, another license, another place willing to look away. What we can say is this: the pattern is too consistent, the fragments too aligned for pure invention. Someone in Kaltenbroich pursued a practice that transformed eyes into specimens, patience into intervals, silence into permanence. And the absence left in its wake speaks as loudly as any confession. Visit the Dresden State Archives today and request Class Z holdings 1859 to 1860, and you will be shown 3 battered boxes. Inside, loose papers, charred fragments, cross-referenced slips that lead nowhere. Archivists admit that the boxes breathe. Items appear, vanish, reappear in different folders. A ledger fragment logged in 1974 was missing in 1991, returned in 2007 with no signature of deposit. When asked, one archivist reportedly said, "Some records don't want to stay closed." In Kaltenbroich itself, the hill has collapsed into ruin. What was once the sanatorium is now a fractured shell overgrown with ivy. Locals call it das blinde Haus, the blind house. Few approach it. Children dare each other to run past at night, but none go inside. Those who linger claim the windows, though empty, still seem to watch. And when the wind moves just right through the hollow stones, it carries a sound not unlike weeping or singing. So we return to the ledger's first chilling line, "Left one screaming." Right eye intact. Was it the record of a doctor's method, the confession of a collector's obsession, or a glimpse into something he believed he could measure, something the rest of us were never meant to see? The story refuses conclusion. The archives resist closure. The silence becomes louder than any answer. This dramatized account, built on unverified historical fragments, cannot claim certainty. But certainty was never its promise. Its promise is the question it leaves behind. If even a fraction of it is true, if even one patient's final gaze was preserved against their will, what does it mean for history to have sealed that truth away? And what does it mean for us, now, to look into the gaps and find that the gaps are looking back? If stories like this unsettle you, if you believe history's darkest corners deserve to be told, even when they resist proof, then join us. Subscribe, share your thoughts, and tell us. Do you believe Dr. Heinrich Voss was erased by chance or protected by design? The answer may never be found in the archives, but the echo of the question will remain.